So today, in product and out of product testing, what every PM needs to know with Irrational Labs' finest, Dr. Isabel MacDonald. In addition to being one of our behavioral scientists, it's of note that she is a postdoc at University of California School of Business. She does some incredible research work there as well, which you may decide to ask her about at the end of the presentation. But I know what you're thinking. You want to know all about Isabel. That's what everybody wanted to know. Tell me more about Isabel. Well, Isabel holds a PhD in public policy from Harvard University with a specialty in behavioral economics. She is absolutely passionate about how a deeper understanding of economic and psychological forces can guide the development of technology tools for social good. She's worked with financial institutions, NGOs, and government agencies to implement large-scale experiments and develop tech products that help users achieve their financial and professional goals. Previously, she was a consultant at the talent practice for Mercer Consulting. In this role, she advised Fortune 500 companies on developing talent pipelines, HR analytics, and compensation strategies that maximize employee motivation and productivity. In addition to her work here at Irrational Labs, as I said, she's a postdoc researcher at the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. Her current research explores how mobile apps help teachers implement remedial education and how blockchain and crypto-backed wallets can advance financial inclusion globally. So if that wasn't a good enough intro to you for you, I don't know what to do. She's spectacular. She's brilliant. She's got great slides. Keep your eyes on the prize. Let's give a sweet virtual round of applause for Isabel MacDonald.
Fantastic.
So overwhelming, all
Ryan.
Oh my gosh.
I know, I feel quite welcomed. So thanks everyone for joining, especially on a Friday. We are honored you are choosing to spend your Friday time with us. So today we're going to be talking about in and out of product testing, but really we're going to focus on out of product testing, which I think is an under leveraged but super useful tool that every PM, every behavioral science enthusiast should have in their toolbox. So first, just to get us started, if everyone can give me kind of a thumbs up or raise your hand if you have run an out of product test using a platform such as Mechanical Turk. Has anyone done that before? I'm kind of scrolling through. All right, great. So I don't see any hands raised. And this is good news because this means that we all have a great opportunity to learn today about out of product testing. So when we think about experimentation, there is very much a holy grail, which is A/B testing. And we kind of all acknowledge that being able to run a formal experiment in your product is absolutely the gold standard. This is true in product design. This is also true in academia. Running what's called a randomized control trial is really the gold standard. But there are many barriers to being able to run A/B tests in products. So for example, it's expensive. We have to spend time, engineering time, designer time, your time, perhaps if you're a PM, to bring these experiments to bear. It can also be pretty risky. So sometimes we might have a fantastic idea of a way we want to transform a page on our website or app, but perhaps it's the biggest revenue driver, that specific page. So that's risky, right? Trying anything there, and is going to expose us to a lot of internal pushback. So sometimes you may be bought in to a behavioral science idea and you're really excited about making a change, but not everybody is on board yet, and you're getting that pushback. And then last, just uncertainty. Sometimes we might have 5 behavioral science ideas of a way that we could take a specific screen or page in a different direction, and it's hard to decide which one we want to go with. And it's often not feasible to test everything because, again, this brings us back to cost. So if you have found yourself facing any of these barriers to experimentation in the past, then out of product testing may really be your silver bullet here to move forward. So today we're going to focus on that. I will first start by talking about what is out-of-product testing, what do we really mean there, and then we'll talk about how that fits into this overall path to product improvement. So how does that relate to other tests, other research we might run specifically in product testing? And we're really going to explore that by walking through a great example of an Irrational Labs project with TikTok. Then I'll share some tips for just general out-of-product testing to get you going on running your first test. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions. So a lot to get through today. Let's dive in. We're starting with what is out-of-product testing? What do we really mean here? So out-of-product testing is going to enable us to test our hopefully behavioral science informed hypotheses. But rather than changing something in our product, we can do surveys, we can do behavioral games and simulated scenarios. And we are going to do that typically through a platform such as Amazon's Mechanical Turk. There are a few others, SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics. All of them enable you to create a survey or a behavioral game and then post it. So anybody in the US, anybody around the world can create a profile on Mechanical Turk, also called MTurk. They log in and see something like this visual here, where there's a mix of product-related surveys that companies are running, academic surveys. So I, in my other life as an academic, have run surveys via Mechanical Turk leading to publications. But this is a really great tool that any company can use as well. It's pretty cheap. So you can see how much the reward is for doing these different surveys. Really cost-effective way to generate a sample, often of a couple hundred people per condition. And so by condition, we do have some element of randomization here. It is an experiment rather than just a survey. And so for that reason, we think of using out-of-product testing as more of a quantitative method of research relative to qualitative. However, we'll talk about how you can really get both, two for the price of one. We'll talk about that a bit later. And then a key point here is that different than a lot of qualitative research, where you might just be showing somebody a mock or asking focus group type questions, we want as much as possible to try and get a measure of actual behavior change and to have some element of randomization so we can be testing the impact of different designs. So that is a bit difficult to understand. The easiest thing to do is just show you an example of what I mean by that actual behavior change. So we'll start with a quick example of a real out-of-product test that Irrational Labs ran for one of our clients. The client was facing a challenge that I think many of us are familiar with, that it's just hard to get people started on a new app. There's a lot of friction there. Ideally, we can send people tips for how to navigate this new user friction. However, we know as behavioral scientists that people don't read all the things that we want them to read. So it's hard to get people to actually engage with tips. So a client came to us and they were really interested in how to address this challenge. We did a full process of behavioral design that many of you might be familiar with, the full 3B process. And one of the ideas that came out of that was thinking about active choice. So there's some great literature in behavioral science that when you ask people to opt into things, make an active choice, rather than just passively informing them about what the options are without asking for that choice, then the active choice conditions typically get more engagement because people feel like they have exerted their preferences, they have in some ways asked for this information, so then when you show it to them later, they're more likely to engage. So the client was really interested in learning more about active choice, but was reticent to just immediately move forward with in-product testing. Again, it's really expensive, so they wanted a little bit more assurance that this would really make a difference. So what did we do? We turned to MTurk to try and explore this question. We were able to recruit users who actually have used this specific product for our clients. So that's one of the real advantages of MTurk. There's just a huge sample population, and you can often filter on specific users of your product, for instance. We recruited 300 participants in about 48 hours. So super quick. I don't have the actual budget of this, but I would guess this probably cost about $500 to run. So again, pretty cheap, pretty cost effective. And for each of the participants in the experiment, we assigned them to one condition, the active choice or the no active choice, which was our control. And so what did that look like? We took them through this survey, and in the control condition, we just told them, here are some tips you might be interested in for using this product. And then in the active choice, the only thing that we changed is that we asked them, which of these tips would you like to see? And then had them kind of check boxes. So they are opting into or expressing a preference of what tips they're interested in. Then what did we measure? We looked at whether they actually wanted to follow through and read these tips. So again, this is different than qualitative research because we're not asking for, what do you think you would do? What's a prediction about your behavior? We're looking at actual behavior. Did they actually go through and read the tips? And that's our kind of primary outcome that we're looking at. But we looked at a lot of other things, how many tips did they read? How much time did they spend? We also put in a sort of open-ended question about what other tips for this product would you be interested in? And I mentioned before, out-of-product testing is an opportunity to do both quant and qual research. If you're getting 300 people to take a survey, you might as well throw some questions in there like this of just getting kind of free-form feedback. Can just be a great way to source a bunch of customer reactions like that. But let's think about the results. So I'll tell you, in the control condition where people were just informed about the tips that were available, about 45% of them decided to then go through and read some of the tips. So relative to this, maybe everybody can get in the chat. What do you guys think was the proportion of participants who read any of the tips in the active choice condition? So our treatment condition. So throw in the chat, what's your guess? A, B, C, or D? We have some D, C, B, say A, great. All right, so really running the gamut here, which is great. This is why we experiment, right? Because the answer is really not clear. So the closest response there was C. About 57% of people in that active choice condition actually did follow through to read some of the tips. So this was a really strong sign that people were more likely to engage with tips when they felt like they had opted into this. And so this was just what the client needed in terms of some additional proof of the effectiveness of active choice, and then they could move forward with going through the development process to test this in product. So that's a quick example of an out-of-product test, but I really want to think about how this fits into the overall process of product improvement and experimentation. So I think a really critical point is out-of-product testing is not typically a substitute for in-product testing, but it helps you prepare and perhaps de-risk some of the tests that you want to do in product. So kind of zooming out, if we look at the full process of how we typically get to our beautiful behavioral science informed products, often early on, we might start with some qual research, just kind of understanding more about our users, challenges they face. This feeds in really nicely to the process of behavioral design. So I know you all have spent some time in the Irrational Labs universe. You have probably heard of the 3B process that we use to develop ideas for behavioral interventions. And then coming out of that process, we have some ideas that we might want to take forward to testing. So then the next step is to think about, do we really need to test either out of product or in product? And I will tell you, not every behavioral science idea really needs to be tested. Because we know it can be really expensive, it takes time to do any sort of testing. Sometimes ideas are so kind of clear that we just want to make them right away. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. But if we do decide we need to test, then we have this decision of, can we go straight to an in-product test, or would it be valuable to spend time doing out-of-product testing kind of beforehand, and that would inform our in-product test. So we'll talk a little bit more about how these things fit together. But perhaps I want to start with this step 3 here, where we're asking ourselves, do we really even need to do either an in-product test or an out-of-product test? This is something I think we don't always think as clearly about. But if we do want to go the experimentation route, that would mean testing in or out of product. And we can contrast that with what Irrational Labs calls a just do, which means just make a change to your product without going through either of these steps for experimentation. So if you do think you might just have a just do, you really want to have almost complete certainty that this will be helpful, and really strong evidence from the prior literature to support that assumption. So examples of that might be just simplifying text, making CTA more salient. These things, I think we have really strong support from the literature, from our experience as behavioral scientists. Maybe we can just make those changes. Versus experiments, we have hypotheses, but we don't have as much certainty. And so there's some questions we need to answer before we make those changes in product. And then as a last point here, what qualifies as a just do or an experiment might vary across companies based on your testing capacity. So some companies are super well set up to run A/B tests. They're running them all the time, versus others are really only going to run 1 or 2 A/B tests a cycle, for instance. And in that case, you really want to prioritize those valuable experimentation resources on more big swings, and some of these smaller changes you might consider a just do. So just to cement this in our minds, let's just look at a few examples, and then you can all jump in the chat. Tell me, do you think this is an experiment or a just do? So here's one behavioral science intervention of helping give people a template to fill in the message rather than just a blank free-form word box. Do we think this is just do or an experiment? Okay, so we have one vote for just do, just do. Great. Okay. Anyone else? Opportunity? Yeah. So I think you guys are right that there is a lot of probably behavioral science support that this would reduce friction and make it easier for people to complete this form. I would actually really recommend experimentation here. And the reason is it's possible that whatever you are putting in this message box is guiding people in a different direction than what they would have said otherwise. And perhaps that information that they would have said if you just give them the free open box would be more valuable than what you end up with from the template. And so for that reason, testing in product or testing via Mechanical Turk and see how people respond to different messages, how they tailor different messages could yield a lot of really important insights. Okay, let's look at another one. So adding this quick copy button that allows people to just copy a routing or account number. Is that a just do, or should that be an experiment? Just do. Okay, a few votes for just do. Yeah, I agree. I think it's hard to see how this would backfire. It's resolving an important friction of it's super annoying to write down all those numbers. So just adding this button, I think is a good just do example. And then let's look at one more, changing the headline or the header of an email that you might be sending out, perhaps to incorporate more behavioral science. Is this an experiment or a just do? Okay, we're getting some votes for experiment. Yeah, I agree. I think experiment. I would absolutely put money that the lower one would perform better, and so I think it's low risk in that sense. But emails are a really fantastic opportunity to be testing out different language. It's pretty easy to kind of randomize things in emails and run experiments. So for that reason, it's just a good opportunity to learn. Would strongly recommend you randomize your email headers. You may not know this, but Irrational Labs is doing this all the time. Just so we can learn, what do people really react to in terms of email headers. Just a really great experimentation opportunity there. Okay, so let's assume you have answered this question of whether this is a just do or an experiment. You've decided this is an experiment. Now the question is, do we go the out of product testing route, or do we jump straight to in product testing? So I'm going to walk through an example that uses both out of product and in product testing that I think can help clarify this. And it's really relating to this idea or this challenge that we face societally around misinformation, especially in social media. So rising body of evidence that a lot of misinformation is shared on social media. I think regardless of where people fall on the political spectrum, people kind of agree that this is a challenge. So Irrational Labs did a really cool project with TikTok. So raise your hand, or give me a thumbs up in Zoom. Has anyone seen this example of this TikTok project that we did with Irrational, or with that Irrational Labs did with TikTok? Has anyone seen this already? Okay, I'm not seeing a lot of thumbs up, which is also great. We'll spend a little bit more time talking about the actual intervention. But even if you have seen this before, I think what we want to focus on today is the role of out-of-product testing leading up to our final experimentation design. So something that we don't talk as much about just with regards to this project is some of the kind of background leading to this. So TikTok approached Irrational Labs. They were really interested in trying to do something around misinformation. They were thinking about having some sort of banner or flag pop up on these videos that had been flagged for misinformation. But there were some really big concerns. Number one, whenever TikTok or any social media company does something about misinformation, it's probably going to end up in the news, and that makes it risky, right? So they were concerned about what potential backlash might be. There was also a concern that if you flag videos as, this content is unverified, would that make people more inclined to watch them, which we call the curiosity killed the cat effect. So definitely a concern there. And then last, there was just a lot of ideas of how you could present this flag, and it would be too costly to test all of them. So TikTok was really looking for some more guidance on how can we refine what an intervention might look like. So for all of these reasons, we thought out-of-product testing would be a really great first step. So what did we do? We ran a study again on mTurk, and we tested a few different conditions where we showed people in this survey things like this. So we have a status quo, which would just be a video with no sort of banner warning. And then we had a video with our kind of control message that just pops up, this video has been flagged. We also tested a bunch of other ways that we could change the copy, the language of that flag that popped up. Again, there were just a lot of ideas of directions we could go. I think we actually started with maybe 30 different ideas of copy, but for the mTurk study, we refined it down to just these ones. And then we had people kind of engage with the video and asked them questions like this: would you consider watching to the end, commenting, sharing, etc. So what did we find? A first important finding is that people said they were least likely to share when we had the caution flag. So using this terminology caution, people had a reaction to, but there's not a huge difference in all of these different treatments. So our kind of takeaway from this is perhaps caution is the most effective language, but the copy doesn't appear to matter all that much. So when we turn to an in-product test, maybe we don't need to have 10 conditions testing different copy. A second interesting finding is that people didn't think these flags would have a huge impact on their engagement, but they didn't have a huge adverse reaction to them. So this is really important to TikTok. They were really worried about the kind of risk of running these types of misinformation interventions. We didn't see a lot of evidence from the mTurk study that would be a big concern. And there was some skepticism about whether it would really make a difference. So this is something that I think we talked earlier about. Ideally, mTurk studies, out-of-product tests can capture actual behavior rather than predictions about behavior, because we know as behavioral scientists, people are really bad at predicting how their behavior will actually change. So what did we decide to do based on these findings? We felt like this kind of de-risked the intervention, but we're going to take people's prediction about the impact of this intervention with a bit of a grain of salt. We think it's still worthwhile to try and test it in product and to see if we can actually get a change on behavior. We also decided, as we said, to go with this caution language. That seemed the best. And we found some support for this idea that kind of any prompt or label might trigger people to want to watch the video more. And so for that reason, when we turn to an in-product test, we want to try an experimental variation to try and address that. Okay, so that was the out-of-product chapter in this journey. Then that really motivated an in-product test. So we tried a few things. First, we're going to try introducing this banner, again, using the caution language. And we're going to try two different versions of the banner. The first that would pop up right away as soon as you get to this video. And then the second where there's a few second delay before it pops up. And this is to try and combat this kind of curiosity killed the cat of we don't want to induce people to want to watch the video even more because of this caution flag. So this seems to be a video just about avocado toast. Seems a little bit benign, but perhaps for other videos that had really been flagged for misinformation. A second thing that we flagged is when people wanted to share the video, we brought up this prompt to encourage them to reflect on that. So I think this is an interesting example of adding friction to a flow, forcing people to stop and slow down and reflect a little bit more. We often talk about why we want to resolve barriers and resolve friction, but here's an intervention where we actually added friction. So overall, we have a control condition, condition 1, where we have the banner pop up immediately, and then this flag if people try and share the video, versus the 3-second delayed banner condition that also had this prompt to get people to reflect. So I'll just jump to the results. Hugely impactful. So 24% fewer people decided to actually share the video when they were shown this prompt. We also reduced views by 5%, likes by 7%. So pretty effective intervention, I think, really speaking to the power of behavioral science to shape real outcomes for something that really matters. And I think another piece of evidence to show that people are not always great at predicting their own behavior. So we had seen in the out-of-product test, people didn't think this would have a huge impact on engagement, but in fact it did. So really cool intervention. I guess 2 other notes that are just interesting, perhaps not specifically related to in and out of product testing, but just have to share because this is cool work. We didn't see a lot of evidence for this curiosity killed the cat. There wasn't a huge difference between having the banner pop up right away versus 3 seconds later. And there was a kind of surprising impact on age. So the impact of these interventions seem to be even greater for older users of TikTok. And yes, anyone over 35 qualifies as an older user on the TikTok platform. So really cool intervention. I think Ryan perhaps can throw into the chat some additional resources on that, both case study as well as a podcast that some of the team members did if you want to learn more about this study. But for the purposes of today, I think this is a really nice illustration of how out-of-product testing can really help us answer some important questions, help us de-risk, and help us refine what our in-product tests are going to be, all in service of leading to the final changes that we're going to make in product. All right, so a last section just on some out-of-product testing tips, and then we will shift to taking questions. So I think an important thing to note, perhaps after the TikTok example, you guys are excited about out-of-product tests, you're ready to dive in, but want to slow down a little bit and caveat a bit what are some of the limitations of when out-of-product testing is not going to be a great solution. A first note is that if you have a super applied setting, very specific context, it can be really hard to simulate that mindset, really capture those decisions with an out-of-product test. So for example, let's say you are designing a fintech product to support people who have just been evicted. And now you want to think about some out-of-product testing to kind of explore decisions that people are making. It's really hard in a survey to say, you know, imagine you've just been evicted and have people find that realistic enough and really capture that mindset out of product versus in that real scenario. So that's the type of thing where it's a bit of an art to try and develop these good out of product tests that really stimulate as much as possible the real decision-making environment. And in the questions, we can absolutely chat about how you might do that for your specific context. but just flagging that it's not possible for every context. So something to keep in mind. A second limitation, a lot of times if you have multi-screen flows of maybe you're thinking about if we change something in this screen and then it affects people's decision-making later, that's also a bit hard to simulate in a survey. So perhaps out-of-product testing is not going to be the silver bullet there. Third, if you have an extremely specific population of interest, like I want people who use my product and then, canceled their subscription and resubscribed later, it can be hard to track down that specific group via MTurk, though we can talk a bit about how to track down specific populations. And then last, there's no rule or law that you have to debrand your mocks in order to use them in product or in an MTurk study. So for TikTok, this was presented as, how would you react to this TikTok screen? But for a lot of companies, especially if they're thinking about risk management, might want to debrand some of their mocks, such as in the active choice example that we saw earlier. And that can just be costly. So you can think about whether that is feasible for your organization. All right, some pro level tips. I think if you have never run an out of product test before, and this is really your first exposure to this concept, perhaps take a screenshot of this and maybe take some notes, but a lot of these are a bit more pro level, so things you might want to come back to a bit later once you've dove into the actual process of trying out a test yourself. But I do want to put those out here. I think this is really valuable for anyone running their first MTurk study. So a first note, you can have screener questions in your study rather than paying MTurk to do this kind of screening for you. So if I am interested in talking to women between the ages of 20 and 30 who use a specific product, I often can pay MTurk more to find that population for me and have them take my survey. Or I can start my survey by asking, are you a woman? What is your age? Have you used this product? And only allow people to continue in taking my survey or my test if they meet those screener questions. So that can often be a cheaper way to do things, something to keep in mind. A second thing, if you are running an MTurk study, really great opportunity to see if there are other teams who also are thinking about an out-of-product test who might want to combine with your study because you are paying people to take this. It's more cost-effective if you can have them try and address multiple research questions. And so maybe you're randomizing the order and showing people a few different surveys, or throwing in some qualitative questions. So we talked about one example earlier on. Another example might be if you're a dating app, maybe you ask just people to fill in a free form response at the end of what's your favorite date you've ever been on? And it's just a really quick opportunity to get 500 responses to that just by working on your prior research project that you had. So definitely take advantage of those opportunities. Another way to increase efficiency is to use a platform called Cloud Research. So I won't go into that here, but if you started to run MTurk studies, just Google Cloud Research MTurk studies. You might find some cost saving opportunities. So plug there. A next tip is to think about attention checks. Because people on MTurk are trying to do this for money, right? They're trying to perhaps earn some extra income off of the platform. They're going to be doing your survey pretty quickly. And a fear is that some population might just be going through and clicking random buttons to get done as soon as possible. So you can try and account for that by including these attention checks, such as just a question that says, if you're reading carefully, please select option B. And then if people select the wrong answer, you can either just immediately end their survey, or you can account for that in your data later. So definitely recommend that. A next tip, say you want to run several rounds of studies of, perhaps TikTok had a few additional copy things that they wanted to test. You could run another study later, but you probably want to exclude anyone who took your prior study just so you're not impacting people's responses. So that is very possible to do in the MTurk platform. You can just kind of Google that and account for that. You can also contact people specifically who have taken a prior survey to do a sort of longitudinal study. So maybe you want to ask people some questions right before the election and then see how their answers are going to change after the election. Very possible to do via MTurk, but you're going to want to start with a larger sample because you know that not everybody you reach out to for that second study is going to respond. All right, so those are some pro level tips. If you have specific follow-up questions on that, happy to chat in more detail, but that was a quick overview. All right, so that is the content I have, and now would love to hear some questions. I know there's been a few questions in the chat, so I don't know, Ryan or Shay, if you want to raise those for me.
Yeah, I've been tracking them. So Shay, Aaron, and Sharon. I'm sorry, Shay and Adam and Aaron. I'm losing my mind. Shay, Adam, Sharon, all have questions. So Shay, you want to bat lead off?
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great. First off, thanks so much, Isabel. That was super helpful. I feel like as a PM, I've struggled with understanding out of product testing, and that made it a lot more salient. So really appreciate that. My question is regarding asking people what you would do in the context of out of product tests, just because like typical user research context or conventional wisdom kind of states that people generally aren't good at predicting what they'll do in the future or what they'll do at the moment, but more what they do in the past. So I was just curious about like kind of managing that.
Yeah, so you're 100% right. You can ask these questions and it can be somewhat helpful. However, you do have to take them with a grain of salt, and really trying to get at actual behavior is much better. So in the TikTok example, we can say what would have been better is to create a kind of simulated TikTok environment where people are just cycling through some videos that we have pre-populated for them, and then we see if they want to actually share those videos or not, and if they watch the videos to the end. So getting those measures of actual behavior versus predictions is important. And I think you should really push yourself to think about ways that you can really try and do this for your product. And to think perhaps a little bit abstractly. So I'll give you another example of a MTurk study that I ran for a company. They were interested in seeing people's behavior decision-making after doing a really tedious, annoying financial task, such as filing paperwork. And what we did is we created a kind of simulated annoying task where we were having people kind of categorize things from a big long list. It was very tedious. And then we had them make similar choices that they would be making for this actual company's product. So you can think about how you might simulate mindsets, simulate decision-making environment, but really pushing yourself to get a measure of actual behavior rather than just predictions.
Got it. That's super helpful. Thank you, Isabel.
Adam, you had a bunch of questions, so maybe pick your top one.
Yeah, I was looking through just now because I was asking some questions that she ended up answering a little bit later on. I guess, you know what, why don't you skip over me, Ryan? I'll see if there's anything that, basically like what I think I heard is that for the questions that I asked around, how do you use this methodology when the feature or product is still under NDA and the brand is something that would be important to the decision. So you can't just unbrand it and you're putting it kind of out in the wild, and it sounds like the answer is don't use this method. But maybe if there's another way to look at it that I didn't catch, then I'm happy to hear that, Isabel.
Yeah, no, it's hard. I think you're right. If you have a super specific context, you need the brand reputation, then, and it's, some NDA, then MTurk is not going to be your best solution. But you could think about if there are adjacent things to that very specific question you have that would still be valuable to test and valuable to learn from. So if you can take the branding part out of it, would it still be helpful to simulate this decision-making environment and kind of run experiments on that? Probably some things you could learn, probably some things you could do to de-risk. Or if you're really interested in this brand research, a lot of companies are using MTurk to do brand-related research with a big sample. So, asking people questions like, what phone do you use? And what, telco service do you have? What are your perceptions about that? You can do that, and it's not clear what brand you are representing, right? And so there's absolutely some opportunities to do brand related things there.
Yeah, I've done a fair amount of quantitative brand related research. That part I'm clear on. I guess the part that where it leaves me, I guess, is once you strip out the brand element or the experimental, not experimental, the part that's not ready for prime time yet. How are you doing anything different than sort of straight usability research at that point?
So I think it really comes down to the sample size. A lot of times you're doing usability research in the context of focus groups. And so maybe you have, 20 participants. Here you can have a couple hundred super cheaply. So that's really valuable. And then I think actually doing this experimental variation that is leading you to some prediction about behavior, and you're actually looking at people's changed behaviors and looking for statistical significance in that difference. That's something that you're typically not getting through typical or straightforward kind of qual research.
That's fair. Thank you.
Excellent.
Absolutely. And I do think just from a internal buy-in perspective, having the statistical significance really can get people a lot more on board versus, we heard this from a few users. Right. It just really, can move the needle and allow you to move forward with experimentation.
Cool.
Awesome. Sharon, you had some software related questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I looked at MTurk a long time ago, and it was really more about pools of labor pools. And it sounds like, and I just looked at it now, and I was wondering, is this recruitment plus survey design plus analysis, or do you have to bring your own survey tool and analytical tools along with you, whether it be Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey or whatever?
Yeah, so all of the studies that I have done, I have used either Qualtrics or Survey CTO, and then you kind of link it through MTurk. So you would have your survey program, and then within MTurk, you have people click a link. I think you might be able to, ask people some questions in MTurk directly programmed into the platform, but the randomization elements, the kind of ease of programming there is nothing compared to Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey, et cetera. So would definitely recommend that you are using a different sort of software and then using MTurk to really connect with people to take that survey.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, and just one note on incentives. So typically how it works is you would have somebody come to MTurk, find your survey, click your survey link, and then at the end of the survey, you say, enter this special code back into MTurk. And then that's how you identify people who actually did your survey and should get paid. So just a note on programming there.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful.
Excellent. Anybody else want to take the mic for some questions? Or you can raise your hand as well. You can raise your virtual hand.
I have a question.
Perfect.
So I was just wondering how safe is it to put it on MTurk, right? Like I'm not like it's a platform owned by Amazon. So say not a knock on Amazon, just if you're testing out new ideas, like do you know whether it's being looked at from the other end and taken in as like possible features? Like has that ever been a thought?
So I don't think the concern is so much Amazon specifically. I think the concern is more that you are just putting this out into the world and you have random people from across the US or if you don't restrict to the US, across the world taking your survey. You should anticipate that anybody taking your survey could screenshot it and put it on the internet. So that should be in the back of your mind. And so that's, I think, a big reason why a lot of this would end up being debranded. So then you can not have concerns about this just getting out into the world.
And do you generally use visuals to go along with the out of product testing, or debranded even? Like is it safe to do that?
What do you mean by visuals? Like what the screen would actually look like?
Correct.
So typically I would say no. So if we think about the tips example, you're just looking at, here's a bunch of information and I'm asking you survey questions like you are accustomed to seeing in something like SurveyMonkey. And there's nothing that looks like the actual product. And there's a few reasons for that. One is around risk of this, might get out in the world. But I think the other thing is you really want to be focusing people's attention on your key dynamic of interest. You don't want to put a bunch of other things on the page that are distracting, because you're really just trying to isolate this causal relationship, and you want to boost salience of whatever the core decision is as much as possible. So yeah, you would typically just think about what is the decision you need people to make. Just put that question directly into something like Qualtrics.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
Great.
Adam, did you have a follow-up question? I saw you raise your hand. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, I think you're on mute.
No, I'm going to hold for the time being. Thank you.
Okay.
Cool. Well, I guess just as a final note, hopefully, I think our goal today was really to show the power of out-of-product tests and how this might fit into your experimentation roadmap. There are so many fine details about running MTurk studies. Luckily, there are a lot of resources online that you can research to find that. I think what is more challenging and is a bit more of an art is crafting this way that you can be getting at kind of overall measures of behavior change. So that is something that I think a lot of behavioral scientists are building an expertise in. Come back to office hours in the future. Happy to answer any questions, help you sort of shape what that might look like for your specific context.
Thank you again, Isabel, for such a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Just a reminder, next week's event about pad split and their interventions, that is an open event. So please do sign up for that through lu.ma and please share with all your friends. We'd love to see you here next week. Otherwise, thank you again, Isabel, for a wonderful presentation. Always enlightening. So you always live up to your headshot.
Thanks so much and have a great weekend, everyone.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.